Hi, everybody. My name is James Boston. I'm the founder of the Association of Former British Colonies. The mission of the association is to examine the legacies of British colonisation with a view to informing UK and global policy change around reparations and decolonisation. To explore this in more detail today and to also learn more about the experience of the British Virgin Islands, I'm joined today by Carvin Malone to discuss this in more detail. Carvin, I'm very grateful that you've agreed to participate in this interview. And it would be great if you could tell our listeners and our audience more about yourself, please.
Okay, thank you very much, James, for the opportunity to have this discussion. Very important and timely, I must say. I'm a former member of the Fourth House of Assembly of the Virgin Islands from 2019 to 2023, and a past member for Health and Social Development from 2019 to 2022. Of course, born on June 12th, 1959 in the Virgin Islands, I completed my pre-primary, my primary, my secondary education here in the Virgin Islands, and my tertiary education at Pace University downtown campus. Um, in terms of my management experience, I'm the managing director of Progressive Management and Communications Associates Limited, which tends to look in terms of small businesses, medium and large-sized businesses, in terms of making them bigger and better. The Caribbean Basin Enterprises, which is a secondary equipment or an environmental equipment company. Also, in terms of governmental experience, I mentioned that I'm an elected member of the House of Assembly, of the Fourth House of Assembly, and most of my experience then would have come from the quasi-government experiences that I've had. I had the opportunity to serve on the Virgin Islands Constitution Review from April 2004 to March 2000. A member of the board of the H. Life Start Community College from 1990 to 2011, member of the British Virgin Islands Port Authority, the Development Bank of the Virgin Islands, serve on the Fiscal Advisory Committee and the Land Development Control Authority. But all of that pales in comparison to the fact that I was a full-time president of the Lions Club of Tortola, also served as president of the Virgin Islands Party from 1999 to 2016, served on Hotel and Commerce and basketball, lawn tennis, and actually Olympic. So there you have a lot of me.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your extensive track record. So let's sort of start at the beginning or provide some historical context to the experience of the British Virgin Islands in relation to British colonization. So,
Yes.
why did the British colonize the what's now known as the British Virgin Islands?
Well, okay. Well, as I mentioned to you backstage, I had to write some of the answers to these because it was a collaborative affair, number one. And number two, as this will go down in history, I have to make sure that we actually complete in the history of the Virgin Islands. The Virgin Islands is our proper name, is a legal name, and known as the British Virgin Islands. So that is one of the things that we are becoming more and more aware of here. So the as we examine our history, we have to recall that there were extensive indigenous populations before European colonization. Excavations in many archaeological sites in places like Soper's Hole in Apple Bay, Coxsey, Pocket Pond, Pleasant Valley, Sage Mountain, Russell Hill, Passia, Purcell, Paraquita Bay, Josiah's Bay, Mount Healthy, Belmont, Smuggler's Cove, and King Garden Bay have unearthed evidence of these early inhabitants. European colonization would start with the Spanish from 1943 under Christopher Columbus, but the islands was used mainly for fishing as they concentrated their efforts in Puerto Rico and Santo Domingo. So names of our countries and waterways are British, like the Drake's Channel, and the Dutch, like Josh Van Dyke. The British would start their engagement with the Virgin Islands in 1517, using it mainly as place from which to launch attack on Spanish and to trade with the Dutch. So the islands were at the heart of British expansionism and empire building. From around 1542, so John Hawkins visited the islands, and then in 1563, with a cargo of slaves bound for Hispaniola, to establish a colony to consolidate British hegemony in the region. So control of this country was at the heart of British Empire building in a region where they were surrounded by the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the Danish. We were at the heart of European war games and territory expansion. We had significant importance then, and we have significant importance now. England took control of the islands in 1672 and would fully establish a plantation system where Africans were held as chattel slaves. They never gave up control over these inhabitants, even when they granted what we call emancipation, but which was just another means of exerting different controls.
Thank you very much for sharing that history. So let's get into kind of the impacts of that colonization. So you mentioned the indigenous populations. You also mentioned the enslaved Africans that were brought to British Virgin Islands as a labor force. So how were those two groups impacted by British colonization?
The islands became a free haven for refugees, for people escaping persecution, people escaping debt payment, and pirates. Many free Africans also settled there, having escaped enslavement in other islands. The Quakers also established a settlement there. The British decided that there was no law and order there and decided to establish a legislature. Once agent selling a distressed One agent selling a distressed cargo of slaves from a shipwreck in Tortola in 1803 wrote that Tortola is well nigh the most miserable, worst inhabited spot in all of the British possessions. This unhealthy part of the globe appears overstocked with every description of people except, they say, for honest ones. Of course, if you cannot colonize, then you are not really cooperative. The British consolidated the plantation system, and the Virgin Islands became a contributor to the consolidation of the British economy. In 1717, there were 547 Black persons in the territory. By 1724, there were 1,430, and 1756, there were about 6,121. The increase in slaves held in the territory is to a large degree consistent with development of the economy of the country. The Virgin Islands became very militarized between 1716 and 1800. The British also spent a lot of time building forts to continue its bid to hegemony in terms of take control of the territory. Structures armed with cannons were erected at Fort Charlotte, Fort George, Fort Burt, Fort Recovery, and a new fort that was built in the center of Roetown, which came to be known as the Roetown Fort. As was common at the time, plantation owners were expected to fortify their own holdings, and Fort Purcell and Fort Hodge were erected on this basis. The British Navy also patrolled the waters. This militarization did not stop a very active resistance movement. Major rebellions occurred in 1823, 1827, and 1830 and 1831, when a plot was uncovered to kill all of the European males in the territory and to escape to Haiti, which at the time was the only free Black republic in the world. The Virgin Islanders always fought for their freedom, even in the face of consistent war against them.
Okay, and let's kind of delve a bit deeper into those impacts of that. I think what's now classed by CARICOM as a crime against humanity, chattel slavery, and also the indigenous genocides that took place throughout the Caribbean. How do those kind of legacies of that history, how can they still be seen today in terms of inequalities, economics, intergenerational trauma, for example? Are there legacies of that history that can be seen throughout the British Virgin Islands today?
Well, this is in some people's mind subjective, this part of it, but the fact is that these are what exists. And inequality is rife because we are not seen as people who can take care of ourselves. We are treated like children, one may say. who need a big brother, a kind neighbor. We live in constant fear that the British will take over our country after centuries of fighting for freedom. This fear we will discuss later in terms of what is meant by this fear. We are not allowed to speak on our own behalf overseas by people who do not know us or have our best interests at heart, meaning in the international organizations, we have to be represented by the UK as opposed to ourselves. It is in the particular Caribbean, we have constitutionally been given, and I'm saying being given, the right to speak to the OECS, the CARICOM, and the other particular agencies, but always without contradiction to the British interests. So it is still not on our own particular terms. Our economy has grown, though our own taxes by through our own taxes or by our own people, yet we have to get approval on our particular budgets. We have built a tourism and financial services sector, our own psychological trauma that tells us we are not good enough based on some of the issues that we are hearing. They try to get us to take loans and to go into debt for generations while we control now what monies we spend. Colonial debt is not our debt. We should not have to pay when you are in control. Let me just explain this a bit. The global warming has effect all over the world. You have you've mentioned the inordinate amount of rain and water right now in the UK. We have a new hurricane that just built off the coast of Africa, and we have to look at these hurricanes when they start to form from in June through to October, sometimes even as late in November. The fact is that the effects of these major storms, we have to still go and loan monies to recover from these. And if we have to do this by taking loan funds only, then we will forever be in debt because they every year it is a hit and miss. Sometimes Guyana as far down, sometimes way up as far as Bermuda. But the fact is that anywhere in between those, then you have, and of course you have devastating effects in the United States, and we see where even in Canada there were threats of it, but they print their own monies, do they? And we don't. We have to take loans. We are being hindered for creating generational wealth because we have been hindered in our very own development. The British have opposed their investments in tertiary education and in infrastructural development to some degree. Tertiary education because it was felt the population was too small to go into the expense of a particular college. It was felt even when we had some secondary education being taught of in the outer or the actual sister islands, there were some thoughts of, well, you don't need it over there. But the fact is that we've always persevered and have come to our own realization. Our British contractors only British contractors can fully benefit from monies that are considered grant fund, something that we have to be guarded against, even in the wakes of devastating hurricanes. Um, and we have to look at what are the current attitudes towards British colonialism in the British Virgin Islands. That's a question that you have, so you can go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's really useful that you've kind of touched on the varying legacies of British colonization, and actually, from my memory, there is work ongoing in the University of West Indies, but also there are reports of this in other areas about the legacies of colonization in terms of the environment and how it has affected modern day countries' capacity to deal with environmental challenges. As a result of that legacy of colonization. So it's very interesting that you touched on that. Before we come to the current attitudes towards British colonization, I wanted to kind of probe a bit deeper in terms of identity. So in terms of again, the legacies of British colonization in the British Virgin Islands, particularly with the descendants of the enslaved African population, how has the kind of sense of identity and heritage and kind of examples of surviving culture, is there any evidence of that in the British Virgin Islands at all?
Okay, well, okay, you can actually repeat that again so I can get the full sense of what you.
Sure. So, I suppose what I'm asking is, are there any surviving elements of African culture or indigenous culture amongst
I
the
see.
current populations of the British Virgin Islands?
Okay, fine, good. Yeah, well, I would say we are a land owning based company. We've had to how do I say this? When these islands were abundant because they did not produce enough agriculture, they did not produce enough of anything. They left it as a bird sanctuary.
Right.
As a result of that, we've had to take bird down and make mortar and build bricks so we can build our economies. So we've had to persevere. We had no one to give the handouts. So at the end of the day, that determination for hard work came up through the particular ages, and we have a number of our particular people who will, like in 1834, we celebrate the whole emancipation.
Hmm.
We also have, and we're reminded, just like um, other persons will say, never again. We have to make sure that we adopt that same principle, never again, and so
Hmm.
forth. So from that, we are resilient people, and it has come from the struggles that we've had to endure.
Sure. No, thank you for sharing that. And let's get on to that next question now. So you've mentioned some of the challenges that are kind of apparent as a result of that history. What are the current attitudes towards British colonization in the British Virgin Islands today?
Well, we must always be reminded of the Virgin Islands legislator, Honourable Tadman. You would read of him some more. He was a supporter of the rights of the Virgin Islands for political self-determination, who noted, "My very chains and I grew friends. So much a long acquaintance tends to make us what we are." That was a saying that I think it was adopted from other sayings, but very pointed. My very chains and I grew friends. So much a long acquaintance tends to make us what we are. We actually associate ourselves with our captors because of the long time that we do. So we feel sorry for our captors even. It is of concern that more effort is expended on making friends with the chains that bound us, while denying embrace to those who want to break those chains. So we have become friends with our enslavers, and we believe that have made us what we are, while we distrust those who suffered with us. The feelings are varied because of these perceptions. So some want self determination while others do not think we are ready. The question becomes, what will make us ready? We are afraid that we will not be able to defend ourselves if there is war. Neither will the British defend us. The only interest will be securing their own people, as they demonstrated back in the 2017 hurricanes, while taking away security resources from the people, and didn't really, as far as some people have perceived, do enough to actually not allow the looting that took place, although this was common in other places. But in terms of readiness, I have oft opined that we've done what is required, because when the whole decolonization started as a result of the 1945 um, 73 mandate by the particular United Nations,
Mhm.
when the 1541 mandate was there, that there shall be no more um, territories held by superpowers. We went ahead. We built our secondary education infrastructure. We built our college. We built our runways. We built our major roadways. We built a number of these particular areas. So the whole concept that we're not ready will have to be explained further, and I think we'll cover it later.
Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of moves nicely onto the section around decolonisation, and you also touched on self-determination. I suppose that would be my sort of next question. How far would you say there is a need for greater autonomy for the British Virgin Islands?
Well, the whole concept of it is that we have to look in terms of, first of all, us agreeing that there is a need for greater economy. The questions are when and in what form. One thing is clear, and this is from the, as I said, from the 1514, you know, United Nations meeting. One thing is clear is that there's seemingly another step there's another step in the global Britain agenda aiming to reestablish British influence globally, a rebuilding of the British Empire. We have recognized for more than 3 decades that we must take control of our finances, and the Virgin Islands, the VI, have been financially self-sufficient by 1978. It is our money uh, and their particular way of acting that seem to still try to determine how we should spend the monies that we raise. We seemingly elect a government that might justify itself to an external force. There are attempts to give citizenship and the right to vote and other rights to the British citizens, yet we do not have similar rights in the UK. We have to persevere or preserve our identity and our culture. But so the whole concept that colonization, that we're not ready for it, is a myth, because as I started to mention, all of these infrastructure, and it's not about infrastructure only, of course. It is about whether or not you have grown. But it is clear by the resolution 1514 resolution. It says that you should not use as a precept that the education process is not far enough, that the social gatherings is not deep enough. These precepts have only caused a delay in self-determination, has not advanced it, and they should not be used any further.
So what steps do you think need to happen to advance the move for self-determination and greater autonomy in the British Virgin Islands?
Well, colonialism, as you say, is not a natural state. It's imposed oppression relationship. Yes, the fact is that although we have procrastinated on the issue of decolonization because of fear and uncertainty, all countries go through the ups and the downs of this. This is so we have a particular blueprint for this that we must seek to adopt. We must realign ourselves even more so with CARICOM and OECS and all of the other particular area. We must look in terms, because from 1960, the C24 has been empowered to create the education necessary for this particular process. But is it fair to someone who may not really want that to happen to look to them for the education process? We have to become more aware. We have to take the uh, pull us up by our bootstraps, our own straps, and look in terms of creating the education necessary. We have to look to places who in 1960 took the jump early, Guyana and Trinidad. We have to look at those who took it in 70s, those who took it in 80s, and learn from their successes, from their particular challenges, and see how best we can do it. Our financial services sector is in place, the tourism sector is in place, or particular courts are in place, or the whole legislature, House of Assembly is in place, our education system is in place. So we have to really look in terms of, if these are in place, then what more is necessary for the UK to say yes when they have said yeah, when they have said no for over 400 years. So I think we're being unfair to the UK by always seeking to have their blessings, that it is okay for us to be self-determined.
And what would need to happen to secure a referendum?
Well, in terms of a referendum, uh, they have placed it in the Constitution, I believe, that we have to have a particular referendum legislation. It is old, it's updated, it's outdated, it needs to be updated so that we can have it. Also, there is a supermajority threshold that have been imposed as opposed to a simple majority. I think that we have to look at a referendum act and whether or not one is truly required. I do believe that if we're going to impose on the people, then they should have an active part in it. So referendum is a very critical part in terms of this whole particular movement. But we cannot continue to rely on um, the 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 superpowers, administrating powers, to just walk away. And maybe they should not walk away because it doesn't say that whether we become an associated state, integrated state, or independent state, that we would not need to have the particular affiliation. Um, Affiliations are required even as wars are raging throughout the world. It is the United Nations and affiliations that are going to protect one country against the other. There's no one army that is big enough for the other superpowers that will come in. And we too, of course, with our 30,000, 35,000, or 40,000, would not be able to say we are self-defendant in terms of being able to defend ourselves and so forth. But no two is any of the superpowers, first world, second world, or third world. So we cannot use that as a precept again to self-determination. So um, self-determination through the referendum is something that we must be able to do, but we must be able to set a date by which it is done so that we
Mm.
can get a full feel and then we can then move it forward from there. But the particular UK have opined that there's no need for the C24 because the folks in their colonies or their territories or their particular holdings have determined that they are comfortable with the governance structure that they have. They have called on some of the 14 overseas territories of the UK and say that some of them are happy with their particular modules. But I'm not sure that they held, well, I'm sure they have not held a referendum to say that either. So the
Mm.
fact is that because you haven't cried out for it, doesn't mean by interpretation that you are happy with it.
And you mentioned education earlier, and I'm just curious: is British colonization taught in schools? Is or should I say, are discussions on greater autonomy fostered within schools in the British Virgin Islands?
Only as it relates to the curriculum set by others.
Okay.
So there's a lot more that must be taught, and this is why the education process is important because, um, uh, well, what we'll have to say is this: even a youngster born in the 90s or 2000, they can ride their cars from east to west, north to south, on the south coast flatlands, on the north coast highlands, without having to walk any of that distance.
Mm.
It was not so even as far back as the 50s or very early 60s, much less in 1834. So, how far we've come. The roads that we travel today were paved with hearts of stone for men. So while they labored and have made it easy for us, we have no appreciation for what they had to do back then to get from what we call the eastern end of the island to the center, the particular town center. We had to light what we call flambeaux for lighting at night. where you can now flick a switch, and if it does not come on immediately, we catch a fit. So the whole thing is that we know not the issues and how far we've had to come, build a resilience, build our land holdings, build a neighbor's keeper. When one of us back then wanted to build a home, the neighborhood got together and they form a train and pass the concrete from one to the other, pass up to the other, and down to another in order to pour the roofs and so forth. So that is how we were able to do this, because we could not rely on grant and aid. We could not rely on a number of stuff. So we had to do it for ourselves. So we were not used to, or we were not forced to rely on others to send handouts for us. We had to do it ourselves. So if this is taught more in school,
Mm.
how we got here from there, then it will be more appreciated. And in terms of where we've come from, we would be then more appreciative of the fact that back in the 60s, when the West Indies Federation broke up, when the 1945 declaration that there should be no more colonies, when we formed the C-24, it was with this in mind, and some went ahead in spite of not being even at the distance that we are today. They went ahead. And some might say, well, let's see what successes they have. But the success or failures are theirs, not others.
And looking to the future, what would decolonisation look like in practice for the British Virgin Islands? So, for example, in other Caribbean countries and countries in Asia as well, you've seen the renaming of cities, you've seen the renaming of roads, you've seen conversations around reparations, for example, and justice for what's considered crimes against humanity. So, what would decolonisation look like in the British Virgin Islands in the future?
Well, that again is a subjective question in terms of what it will look like. But the fact is that, as I have mentioned, some of these particular areas, we have had to go through the checklist of items that would, quote unquote, deem us, without having to set the exam again, decolonized. It is only the formal declaration of it that we ourselves will have to go through. We will celebrate on Monday, as opposed to St. Ursula's Day. We will celebrate our Heroes and Foreparents Day. We will celebrate the March of 1949 in November. We will celebrate Islam Stout community, Islam Stout, our first chief minister, in March. So we have a number of those particular areas which celebrate our independence, so to speak, and remember our people and those who have led. This day of Heroes and Foreparents Day is big because it recognized not only those who were elected to office, but those are cornerstone, sort of a society, those who have made a particular society. So decolonization will continue, and we can then have a say as to whether or not the EU community is good for us or bad for us.
Yeah.
Not really through a Brexit deal, of which we had no particular choices. EU was particularly, one might say, I'm not sure of all the intricacies, good to us in that they had helped to fund some of the culinary arts centers, some of the libraries and other stuff. So when um, when others might fund only our courts and prisons, the EU was able to fund culinary centers and other particular legacy building particular establishments, and we can then look to see um, other areas that we can look to for this type of affiliation that we can look to. So as I'm saying, decolonization have already started. I'm not sure if we need someone to give us the the paperwork for it. Do we need the paperwork for it? or can we just move ahead and just have the referendum so that we can then move forward with it?
Sure. And my final question was, if the British Virgin Islands was to achieve greater autonomy, might it look to align itself with the CARICOM reparations mandate? And then just provide a bit of context. So for those of our audience who might not know what that is, the CARICOM reparations mandate is, in its current form, a 10-point plan, which really calls on Britain and other European governments to provide reparations in various forms, for example, debt cancellation, addressing the public health crisis, for example, illiteracy eradication. These are just a few examples. I'll share a link to the full plan in the caption of this interview. But back to the question, Carvin, is that something that the British Virgin Islands would look to align themselves with?
Well, it is always important to note that we are better together. Yes, better together is a very important aspect of it. As I mentioned to you when we spoke earlier, the fact is that we have a lot of work to do in terms of not seeking to be handed this paperwork for things that we've already done in terms of decolonization. And reparation is one of the particular aspects that is it should not be just a buzzword.
Yeah.
We have to look in terms of exactly what reparation really means, because yes, we have to pull ourselves by the bootstrap. And I am reminded of one interview to the Guyanese um, representative saying that the slavery here was as the challenges in other places, and he had to remind him to separate himself from that type of language and so forth. So the fact is that reparation, in whichever form it might take, is a particular goal in which must be achieved. But we ourselves cannot be looking to eat on both sides of that fence.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look in terms of declaring ourselves and free ourselves from the from the bond, if you were to call it that, and so that we can then look in terms of what our future holds.
Sure.
Yes, we will have to continue to align ourselves further with CARICOM, further with OECS, further with United Nations, further with all of the superpowers. But we must not continue to give a pass to the members of United Nations who have made a declaration from 1945 and seem not to have an intention of having it to be carried forward, other than quote unquote conversations every year as to how far you have reached,
Mm.
without fulfilling their other mandate of providing the resources. Some folks have asked us to define what these resources are, whether it's monetary, whether it is educational, or whether it is who has this benchmark as to what you have to attain in order to do it. It should just declare that there is no more holdings of territories by administrating powers, period. And then all of the granting aids that go from America to every other country, from the UK to every other country, from all of the superpowers to every other country. Well, why then, if it is so deemed that assistance is required by the small states, then that can happen without having to say you are our territory, and you don't give the same level, even in proportionate form, to the very territories that you have deemed to own.
Mm. Thank you very much, Carvin. What I will do as well is I will also put a link to the United Nations mandates that you mentioned around territories and colonies and what have you. So I'll make sure that that is also available for our viewers to check out as well, because I think it's really important, particularly for understanding the conversations around greater autonomy in the sort of British Virgin Islands and other British overseas territories as well. So I'll share that with our audience. Thank you very much for this interview. It's been extremely insightful. I've learned so much, and I hope that this interview serves as a basis to support the important work that you're doing going forward.
Well, yes, I would just like to give a plug for for our One VI Agenda program. One VI Agenda is not partisan at all in terms of everyone invited to participate, but it is geared towards creating the educational resources necessary to fully understand what the United Nations mandate is. What are the pledges made by the United Nations? What are the particular intricacies of self-determination, and the stages that it quote unquote will go through? And even in the conversation today, although it was not well expounded earlier, I will continue to now build on it. That just like how they sat down in 1945 and said there should be no territories held by greater superpowers, they should follow through on that, as opposed to this quote unquote, you will prepare them for it. We would say that the places are now prepared. Some 45 to now is basically how many years? Some 58, if not 68 years later. We don't have any more preparation that we have to do. So we can now make a declaration that there, quote unquote, should not be any territories held by administrating powers, period. Because the actual preparation for it have already been had. And it's just a matter of getting that done so that we can then follow through from there.
And what advice would you give to someone or persons who may want to support this aim?
Well, this aim is that we can then look in terms of um, getting to know more about each of the territories who are actually ascribed to this. Number one, look at in terms of the particular areas that people need to be, might need to learn more about, because the experiences of other lands, your committee, for instance, I'm a member of the committee you've set up in terms of the chat you set up to give more education. Unfortunately, too many people don't like to read, not for a long time. And even when you put it in audio, then they don't have enough time to listen. But the fact is that um, we have to read anyway, we have to talk anyway, and we have to impart the knowledge anyway. So whatever medium is required in order to do this. So platforms such as this, platforms such as in-country lectures, and broken down in small bites and pieces. You could animate it as much as you want, but the fact is, the message need to be out there, and those persons who are very well studied then need to be able to avail themselves so that we can then help those um, who are unsure as to what um, self-determination mean. Let them know that it is not a particular slash and burn type of particular feeling. Some folks reckon that you want to be self-determined because you want to be lawless. It is not so. You want to be self-determined because you don't want anyone to tell you what to do. Not so. In fact, the more free in terms of constitution you become, the more dependent you may well be on all of the other superpowers. So the fact is that it is a bond that you must have.
Thank you very much, Carvin. I think that's really useful. And I'll also, if that's okay with you, we can share a link to the work that you're doing so that people can learn more about it, can take their time, can read through, and also support, because I'm sure that there are many people out there worldwide who want to support the work that you're doing.
Okay, great. And I'll be very, very appreciative of it. And yes, you can go ahead to the www.oneviagenda.com. www.oneviagenda.com.
Excellent. I'll share that in the caption as well, so people can click the link. So thank you. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope that you find this really useful in another chapter of our efforts to learn more about the legacies of British colonisation and to inform global and UK policy change around reparations and decolonisation. This interview will be published on the Association of Former British Colonies YouTube channel and other social media networks. So feel free to leave any comments or questions or responses in the comment section below. Thank you.
And thank you.